Right, off we go.
Okay, good morning, Professor Tootle.
Morning.
So Professor, I'm usually fairly cheery, or at least I try to be, before we introduce Professor Bruscino. But this week has been kind of tough for me. I don't know. It's not only the Charlie Kirk assassination, but it's, I don't know, September 11th yesterday, and then we had another school shooting in Evergreen. I don't know. And then it was a lot of my friends, left and right, are doing stupid stuff on the internet. I almost feel like I need to cancel social media. I just don't like seeing my friends saying stupid stuff. Left and right, actually. I don't really want to talk about any of this today because we've got an important topic, but it did kind of dominate this week's news. From a history professor, is there anything we need to be reflective of? I'm looking for maturity. I'm looking for wisdom instead of this gut reaction stuff that people want to put out. Do you have any words of wisdom for us, Professor?
Uh, well, I was reminded of this idea in one of the Supreme Court decisions from last week, which is that you essentially had three judges saying, there's not always a constitutional remedy for everything. And there isn't always a remedy for every social problem in politics. Our system is predicated on the idea that we can create the preconditions for human beings to live in peace, but it will not actually
Hola,
guarantee
¿cómo está?
human beings
Bien,
will live
bien.
in peace. And when, so after the Charlie Kirk uh, shooting, I felt like the one person who had the right response was Tom Bruscino, who simply posted a prayer and said, "This is what our response should be." And maybe that's a good way of introducing our guest,
Yeah.
because there are some things in life that are um, beyond politics and require an answer beyond political commentary.
Yeah. Yeah, Professor, I think that is wise. I don't want that to be his introduction yet because I have a matter of personal privilege, but that's the kind of maturity that I was looking for. Thank you. I also saw Professor Brusino's post and liked it, and then I noticed you reposted it. I thought it was very appropriate, and so thank you for the compliment towards him. So, a matter of personal privilege, then an introduction. Um, I think our podcast, obviously, we haven't made it big time. And that actually wasn't our intent to make it big time and go viral and be the talk of the town every week. It would be okay maybe if it does that, but our intent is different. It's to try to have us be good citizens. It's to try to make our little difference in our own lives and talk through things of import. And when friends join us, it's great. And if something goes viral and they learn something later, we're dropping these little breadcrumbs all over the internet, hoping that somebody will look at an issue in a different way because of historians like you. Thank you for your time over these last 4 years. The matter of personal privilege before the introduction is today, now on a good news fact, today is the 25th anniversary of the largest incorporation in the history of the United States, the city of Centennial, which I'm a founder of. We celebrate it tomorrow at a chalk art festival and a pancake breakfast thing, where we first met. Um, and I just think it's a remarkable historical oddity, actually, that 25 years for Centennial, 150 years for the city of, or for the state of Colorado, the Centennial State, and 250 years of our nation. And I'm hoping that this year we continue to build on what citizenship means and what our country means to the world. And 250 years is a long time to be celebrating uh, I think it's the longest constitutional republic in the history of the world, and it means something. So I think that the end of Professor Palooza, you have had a terrific just litany of august professors join us the last 2 months as Gus, and you wanted Professor Brusino to be the last. So it kind of worked out nicely today, because it's also the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. And Professor Brusino is a historian, and actually more important than his awesome background and what he's done for his career is your personal friendship. You really admire this man. Uh, all those professors you brought in for us have been terrific, and they're great. You really like Professor Tom Bruscino. And so I'd like to have you introduce him in whatever manner you wish, either formal or informal. And then we'll get to talk about perhaps the end of World War II, maybe up to September 11th. I don't know. Let's see where the show goes. But Professor, the show is yours, and I'll interrupt as I always do.
Sure. Well, and the other professors we've had on are all people who I consider to be friends, and we all have friends in life. But Tom Brasino is not a friend. I mean, he's we've been friends for almost 30 years. Um, we were together on 9/11, and he's basically family. I don't even know where to begin. We talk or text almost every day,
Mhm.
sometimes every day in a row. We talk for hours. So he calls me often when he's driving anywhere. So imagine that kind of a friendship. I'm uh, his middle son is my godson.
Ah.
So I when um, so in terms of yeah, he's not a friend. This is somebody who's, like I said, just as closer to me than most of my family. So despite his obvious flaws in character,
May we all be so
yeah.
fortunate to have a good friend like that.
So,
A little bit of his
but
professional background, perhaps?
yeah, so he's a proud son of both Ohio and Colorado, and went out to uh, uh, from Cleveland, but went out to college at Adams State, and where his daughter is starting school there as a freshman this year, going to be on the wrestling team, and he played football for Adams State. I met him when he came out to Ohio University, um, and immediately became friends. He's sort of the social ringleader of our crew, and he's Italian, and he just sort of took over. He was the one who threw every party. He was always making food, always inviting everybody over. Everything always happened at his house. Every party, every barbecue, every dinner. He and his wife Terry were the ones who hosted everybody. And uh, After that, he went to work I'm trying to, let me see if I can get all this straight. Did you go straight to SAMS, the School for Advanced Military Studies?
Yeah, Army Center of Military History in DC
Oh,
first.
Center of Military History. Oh, that's right. You were up in Maryland briefly, or
It was at
what?
DC. It's at Fort McNair.
Yeah. That's right. It was Fort McNair. And then after that, out to Sam's in Kansas, and you were living in Leavenworth, right?
Lansing, sure. So, yeah, Fort
Lansing.
Leavenworth was where I was working. Yeah.
Right. And then, well, the address where I mail the packages, or where you would go to work is the, and then he's been at the Army War College for, gosh, I don't know how many years. How long have you been there?
Eight.
8 years.
Yeah,
Okay.
2017.
Yeah. And preeminent historian, of so many things. For years, I used his book, which I think is on the board behind him there, A Nation Forged in War. Really one of the most important books when thinking about issues of race, what it means to be an American, and how the experience of war shapes the character of a generation. One of the pioneering studies of ethnicity and war and administration. It also has a nice book on Funston, which I like, which is a mostly an intro of Funston. He's got a book on Meuse Argonne. He's got a map there behind him of the Meuse Argonne. Forget, and then another thing that I always really liked that he did was that little book you did on um, borders in transnational Warfare.
Sanctuary and Irregular Warfare. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great little book. Highly recommended. And you did that. That was for a series that the Army was doing during the Iraq War, right?
Yeah, so I worked at the Combat Studies Institute before I went to the School of Advanced Military Studies, and we did the historical studies for to support, provide some perspective for ongoing military operations, Army operations. So
So
Iraq and Afghanistan, there are problems with the cross-border sanctuary. So I wrote a study about that in Vietnam and Afghanistan, the Soviets in Afghanistan dealing with that.
So he has a really unique perspective in that he's one of the few military historians who could say that, you know, people who are making real world military decisions were looking at his work. And then as for what you do at the Army War College, I thought that would be a nice way of starting out, like, because I don't think a lot of people understand the military education structure and maybe the difference between uh, well, I bet if you just go through and give like one or two sentences on the differences between the places where you've been, starting, start with where give like a one or two sentence description of each of those places, just to give an idea of where your career has taken you and the educational structure of the military.
Sure. So I've worked for the Army my whole professional career. So I'll start by saying that I speak for myself and not for the Army War College, the Department of Defense/War, or the United States government. These are all my own views. So I always have to get that out of the way. Yeah. So I worked at so there's kind of let me back up. I'll just say this first. So just so people understand how military education works. So most, and especially for officers and officer development. And you'll go to an undergrad school. It might be one of the military academies. My son is at the United States Naval Academy now, or you go to West
Which son
Point.
is that, by the way?
Your godson.
That's right.
Yeah, he's there doing that, so that's good. They had issues yesterday too,
Yeah.
which is I'm with you, John. It's been an interesting week. Uh, less than inspirational. So let's see what we can do with that. Anyway, so you started those schools about as you come out and you get commissioned as an officer, and about 10 years or so into your career, 10, 12 years into your career, you usually go to the middle part of your education. You start going away from small group leadership into larger group staff and larger formation leadership. And so they go to the command general staff colleges, intermediate level education, it's sometimes been called. So that's like the Command and General Staff College for the Army, Air Staff and Command College for the Air Force. They all have them. They're their own versions of it. All the services, the Marines have their own separate ones. And then
Professor Bruscino?
yeah.
I ended as a captain, so I just went to officer basic course. Is this military experience all different than officers getting graduate degrees and sometimes PhDs? A lot of senior officers get undergraduate degree. I mean, they already have an undergraduate, but then they get a master's degree from universities and then military. Is that right, or do I have that wrong?
Yeah, there's a whole big complicated story about the various ways to get masters and PhDs as a military officer. Sometimes the military will send some people to go do that, and then they'll go off and be instructors back at the academies while they're
Mm.
working on them. So they'll do some of that. And there's a couple of other programs that allow for it. And then a lot of them will get, online master's degrees along the way, or some other way of doing it. They also get master's degrees, at least right now, at the Command General Staff College and at the Army War College.
Oh, they do get that's one and the same then.
Well, it's not necessarily like most of them don't actually care about getting their master's degrees from Command General Staff College, and certainly their War College because they already have one, two, or three when they come
Okay.
in. So it doesn't really matter to them that much, but we kind of make it a thing about ourselves so we can be a graduate school. But again, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see if that changes with this administration. It's possible that it might. We'll see what happens with that. But so like I said, so you're in mid-30s, they go to the Command General Staff colleges. And then if they're in for another 10 years, they get 20 years or so into their career. And if they get selected, they go to the senior service colleges, which includes like the Army War College, which point we're preparing them for the most senior level positions. It's the last sort of extended formal education that they have. There's some smaller, programs for preparing generals and all of that, but as a full year program, they go to the senior service college, they go to the Army War College. So I've taught in those. So I've taught at two of those levels. And I've got a lot of familiarity with the undergraduate version where they do get a degree, obviously usually a bachelor's of science, even if like the Naval Academy, you get a BS, you don't get a BA, even if you're in a history or something as your major, because of a heavy engineering side of it to what they do, and uh, yeah, and then so I've taught in all of those kind of different levels. Or remote taught in two of the different levels because School of Advanced Military Studies was at the Command General Staff College, where I taught. It was sort of like a second year honors program. It's the best way to describe it there. And then uh, there's a whole bunch of other programs. I mean, are the defense the War Department now, the Defense Department is a big vast thing that has lots of moving parts to it. And so my first job was, like I said, was at the Army Center of Military History, which is uh, right has multiple tasks, runs the museums for the Army, a lot of the museums programs from the Army. It does historical support. So, if the General Staff or somebody has a question, official Congress, whatever, has a question about it, a historical question, provide some perspective on some issue, they'll ask the Center of Military History, and they also write official histories, gather documents and write official histories of World War II, very famously the Green Books, but there's similar series for Korea, Vietnam. I think they're going to be working on the War on Terrorism ones, and then they're doing a bunch of Army and the Cold War volumes that they've been putting out over the last 10, 15 years. And
Explain what the
then,
green books are, by the way.
what's that?
Explain what the green books are.
So the Green Books are the official history of World War II. They're called the Green Books because they have green covers. And so it's a little bit of a change. So some people who are familiar with it, it's sort of all derived out of, it's a bit kind of complicated story, but it's derived out of sort of gathering the records from the Civil War. So if everybody's ever seen the official records of the War of the Rebellion, as they're called, officially titled, they're big blue volumes, and they were gathered up all of the memoranda, letters, telegrams, orders, circulars that went around, and they put those together. They did something similar for World War One, and then they started to realize with World War Two that the documentary collections would be so vast that what they really needed to do was write actual histories. And so they embedded a lot of actual professional historians, academic historians, often were embedded into units, started telling their histories in the War Department. And so you have these vast volumes, which I think are dramatically underused because of some bias we have against official histories, because we sometimes think of them as court history, which is not true if you read them, but that would require reading them. And people are hostile to that stuff. It's easier just to dismiss them, sort of like we do to memoirs. But Center Military History does that too. So I was there. I was in historical support. So we were asking questions. So we get questions from Congress or the Army staff, or we generally don't try to answer too many questions from the public because most of those are about family members who were in the service and where their records are. That's a different repository. Personnel records are not really what the Center of Military History does. And then, so that was what that job was. Combat Studies Institute was like, hey, we need faster studies um, than what the Army. So now that and Combat Studies Institute is now Army University Press. I highly recommend people go look at that. It's a big, there's tons and tons of resources there, often really, really well done. Like a lot of the work that Army University Press, which Combat Studies Institute falls under now. So that's, those are the places I've been. So a lot of that I've written for some of these official history sort of style, right? The government publications, and I've written for a pretty wide variety of military, some military history, civilian military history publications, popular presses, magazines,
So
journals.
let me cut you off, and I want to get you first. I want to get a clarifying term for what is the difference between strategy, strategy, and tactics? What define those terms?
Yeah. So grand strategy has two meanings. So we'll start at the top. So grand strategy has two meanings. One of them is sort of an international relations thing. It's about sort of it's an idea of it's an overall theory for how a country provides for its security, prosperity. So it's just kind of so think like things like big ideas that then inform the specific policies, right? So like something like the Monroe Doctrine is an idea of a grand strategy. We want to keep any sort of great powers from coming back, coming into the Western Hemisphere. There's some that are still standing, some still existing. but no new ones, right? So, we have a whole bunch of policies that align with that general principle. Like it's a good one to do that. Containment was a grand strategy of the Cold War, that kind of idea. We want to contain Soviet communism, so we're going to issue a bunch of policies. Now, grand strategy has another meaning. It's sort of a British one. Americans would often call it national meaning, which would national strategy, which would be that in a war, and we sort of use these unfortunately interchangeably. They're different things, but in a war, you do a whole bunch of military efforts. Obviously, the normal things you would do in a war, that would be normal kind of strategy, how you intend to win a war, and then militarily, and then grand strategy or national strategy would be incorporating diplomacy into that, economic efforts, propaganda, information, psychological stuff, all the sort of broad things you do. So if you kind of think of something like the Emancipation Proclamation, is a good example of a type of sort of like a broader strategy for war, coming out of from Abraham Lincoln, issued by the president. It has diplomatic effects. Because this war becomes explicitly about slavery, makes it harder for European powers to recognize the rebellion, and then it has a force multiplier effect because then you can the emancipated slaves can become troops in the forces, so like all those sorts of things that you do. So they go into a war. We do a lot of that stuff. Loans during wars, lend lease, all that kind of stuff are examples of a kind of a grand strategy in a war. Strategy itself has no meaning anymore.
Hold on, Professor. On grand strategy, where would mutual assured destruction go in nuclear war? Is that a grand strategy? Is it a
Yeah,
policy?
yeah, it's a policy. It's a deterrent policy.
But
So
it's not a grand strategy.
no, I don't think. I mean, the contain. That's it's a policy you do to allow for containment.
Okay.
So like that would be the sort of to follow the contain to keep Soviet communism, in its within its boundaries that it is at now. It's a
Okay.
So,
deterrent. It's a form of deterrence. It's a threat that you use to, it's a military threat. Say, if you do these things, if you try to use nuclear weapons, we have enough nuclear weapons that we would um, destroy ourselves, which would then, we'd destroy each other, and which provides then space to use some other policies and approaches to keep
what
the
do you mean
situation.
by strategy doesn't exist anymore?
It means everything, so it means nothing. Um, yeah,
Hmm.
so when you think about people saying that they have a strat, that your school, your organization, John's, the Centennial, they probably said they probably had a strategy for developing um, for developing the incorporation of the town, and like,
Yeah.
we have a strategy for going to the grocery store. People have strategies for raising their kids. And it means everything. It just means we generally, anytime we say approach, position, an approach we're taking, a position we're taking, anytime we have a plan, we call it a strategy. So it
Yeah.
means nothing anymore.
So what is a tactic? How do you distinguish that does tactics still have a meaning?
Yeah, tactics hold up pretty well in the military because tactics are sort of the approaches you use for battle, for various situations in battle and in engagements. So, two forward, one back, two units forward, one back. That's for this attack. How we're going to do how we're going to breach or do a river crossing. How we're
Yeah.
going to breach an obstacle.
Yeah.
How we put how the tactics of how air formations fly together, and provide air support, those sorts of things. The practices
Professor,
of that.
on tactics, does that go from all levels, from brigade, battalion, company, platoon down to squad? Are there squad tactics and
Yes.
brigade tactics?
Sure. Yeah. So it's like, so basically like it's the very simple way to think of it, the very simple way of thinking about these levels, which I'm actually trying to get people away from personally, but is that tactics are fine, but tactics are how you battle. Operational art is how you campaign, stringing together battles, the way you think about doing that stuff into a overall coherent campaign, and strategy is how you war, if it in its true form. So
So
the
this, you're transitioning perfectly into the question I was going to ask you yesterday. Um, I, the two classes I was teaching yesterday, one, it was about the end of the Revolutionary War, the period transitioning from the Articles of Confederation into the Constitution, a little bit of the Newburgh conspiracy. But then in my other class, I was teaching about the Spanish-American War. And I got a, a good question that I turned into a better question from a student, as we often do. And I was thinking about, because I had just finished saying to, in one form or another, to both classes, that the United States of America is an ideological nation state, and it sets up the preconditions for human beings to live in peace. But in both classes, I got to the point where I showed a map and I said, but we have to live in this world. And, in one class, I'm showing the map of the world in 1900, and it's every place on Earth that isn't being protected by Britain or the United States is being conquered by European colonists, except for Sweden, Switzerland, and a couple places that are about to be taken, like Ethiopia and Morocco, that were about to fall. And and um, what are the implications? How does it change how we fight a war that we're a country that how does the fact that we're a representative form of government that presupposes that peace is possible and preferred. I was thinking it strikes me that revolutionizes the very idea of war. Uh, that it goes from being um, the good result we want from this is uh, we would say almost every other country on earth has a stagnant idea of wealth creation, and the goal of this is to take something from someone else and give it to ourselves, rather than the goal of this is to establish a workable peace. And when you are engaged in actual war fighting, that would change how you go to war, because it incentivizes a specific result when the fighting is over. And so I was thinking, if you were trying to explain that concept to a you know 19-year-old, uh, um, because the next question that they asked was, well, how? Give us some concrete examples of how America's larger purpose has actually changed tactics and strategy uh, in warfare. And I know John wants to stick to post World War II, so I don't know. I'll if you can think of other examples, if obviously you can, because both my examples were pre-World War II. But can you think of times when America's purpose altered strategy and maybe more interestingly, like tactics?
Yeah, so no, I mean, the tactics, tactics, not so much, right? I mean, tactics are pretty, they're you've got a problem right in front of you. It's a short-term thing. You're internal to a war. You're fighting. You have certain technologies available on certain terrain against a certain type of enemy with certain capabilities, and you have to. And there's sort of like there's some tactics become like very specific. They change a lot, but they almost to the point of being
For
like
instance, we
laws.
value human life. We don't want our overall strategy is that we don't want our soldiers to die. And
Right,
other
but yeah, but
countries
the
don't care as much
well, there's
about
certainly
well,
that's certainly that yes, that's absolutely part of it. We have we do have a concern. So there is but that's not necessarily unique to our system. Like that could also be treated as a calculation. So when it comes to tactics, like that could also just be treated as a calculation of, we need to preserve our combat power so that we can go get the after the nasty ends we want to get after. Right. Like it could have the same thing. Now it tends to be that a lot of those countries who are after nasty ends don't actually care that much about their troops because they're evil. Um, so that's, and this is this point. I think So let's like back up to it. I think it's like I know you're emphasizing peace, but it's a particular type of peace. It's a peace that's characterized by orderly liberty. And this is so vital to understanding the United States that that this I have like it's really difficult to figure out how to express this perfect well and pithily, um, because and what we've defaulted to is saying that we're democratic, which is a terrible word to describe what we are. Democracy is a specific form of government, not a not a and it is not necessarily about orderly liberty. In fact, democracies can get like are wildly disordered and might be have no
Yeah.
liberty at all. Um,
And again, I was teaching the Articles of Confederation, and I was trying to emphasize to my students that uh, we had a government that tried to turn desire into action, and that is the enemy of ordered liberty. Like because what our government figured out was by having too much democracy, it was actually undermining the liberties of all.
yeah,
Uh,
so I mean, as I say, like I think that we were talking a little bit about David Herbert Donald, and
yeah.
he was using democracy. We were having a discussion as we do, as we pointed out, we talk about these things. And, because I'll just randomly send him a text and be like, you weren't a very good historian. And, and it was about this issue. And I was saying that if you think about like the Civil War, for example, is, which is a kind of version of the Articles of Confederation, a similar type of problem with the same, what much worse, but a much more like greater example, like superficially looks the same, but their liberty that they were seeking was a disordered liberty. And it was disordered because the things because the principles at the highest level of it were wrong, bad, evil,
Yeah.
right? So like, when that's
Racist
your
with slavery.
fundamental,
Yeah. Yeah.
so when you're saying like the Confederacy died of democracy, that's wrong. Confederacy died of like of disordered liberty, and more specifically the United States killed that version of disordered liberty, which was good, right? And which was happens in these places because it's not, we don't, this is the big misunderstanding about the United States. We don't go fight people over power. We fight people over what they're going to do with that power. And we fight for what we're going to do with that power, which is set up a system of orderly liberty with fundamental human rights involved in it, rule of law, free markets, all of those things, which will then will create the space. This is the piece we're talking about, the space for people to get their own lives in order, which cannot be dictated by the government effectively at all, right? It has to be protected. The government provides the space for that. Our system provides the space for that. But that is something that happens internally. So when you say about like the response to the Charlie Kirk murder the other day, and the response to that was like, hey, like, let's go back to what, the fundamental principles of what we're really about. And us have to do that individually. We have some space in this, but we have a responsibility as free citizens to live up to pursue that true happiness, which is not moments of pleasure, which is what we think it is. Too many people think it is now. Or as Pope John Paul II said, St. John Paul II said, it's not freedom to do what you want, it's freedom to do what you ought. That is what we like, that is what our liberty is for freedom to do what you ought to do and have a rightly ordered life. And in a right, we have citizens who are trying to live rightly ordered lives inside of a well-ordered and an orderly liberty system, then this is what allows this to happen. And we don't go to places to do that. We go to places if we must, and and then that's what we try to set up in those places. But only if we remember what it's about, which is why like this podcast and some of the other stuff we do matter so much. Is why the education stuff you guys are always talking about on here matters so much. Is because we're teaching people that the United States is evil and just like everyone else, if not worse. And this is the fundamental problem. You can't have like people don't understand like and so they put the problems on a government instead of and they misapprehend what it is that they're actually supposed to be doing in their lives.
Do you think it's so? I was thinking about this actually. There's a kind of a parallel. Um, 'Cause I was thinking about, I've been involved in many conservative organizations over the years and conservative youth organizations over the years. And one of the things that began to disturb me And when I first began rejecting involvement with specific um, youth organizations, was when I detected that they were no longer character shaping institutions. And that I noticed that the character shaping institutions were losing popularity, and the personality affirming institutions were the ones that were exploding in popularity. And I thought, this is very dangerous. And I know that we're both parents, and we have both tried to force our children to be involved in character shaping institutions. But do you think there's a broader trend away from character shaping institutions? And do you think that ultimately this will pop up in military readiness? I wonder if it would cause declines in recruiting or differences in training if the assumption is I'm joining the Marines. This sounds absurd just to say it out loud, but you know, I'm joining the Marines so that I can get some badass Instagram and I'm going to change them rather than I'm joining the Marines so that they will change me.
So, seeing my son at the Naval Academy, and given what happened yesterday, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the story, and this is
Yeah.
all a little bit of rumor, sort of. I got, about this. I don't really know the details, but it appears there was some sort of cyber attack that created the impression there was an active shooter, and that the active shooter. So this is the active shooter was supposedly a former student who'd been kicked out and was dressed as a police officer and was going around this way. And so there was a student who was wounded yesterday because like, he fought a cop, from what I understand, and was shot in the arm in this event because everybody was confused caused by this. Which, by the way, I consider this to be an attack on the United States, and treason. Whoever did this should be I consider an act of war. If it came from another country, I think we should respond with violent force to this. This is the sort of activity they have. However, on the sort of flip side of this, think about the type of person young person who would, given the information they had, would stand up and and say, "Hey, look, I'm not trusting this. I'm going to fight based on the information I have." Um, I see this. I see it. I've seen it the last few weekends. These are great human beings that are at the school. Like you can be proud. Like there are the institution itself does an incredible job of the military does a very good job of bringing people in. They have a very good focus on what they're supposed to be about. I think one of the best things I heard when my son showed up at the Naval Academy is that, like, we're going to teach him followership. We're going to teach him how to follow this summer, because you can't learn how to lead until you learn how to follow. I think that is a lesson that every American should learn how to do. So
In this, in the official history, and you said, and you kind of made this aside where you said, well, and I think that that's a misunderstanding that these are court histories. And I immediately thought of, I'm going on I'm going to lead another group up at the Japanese internment camp, and of the documents that we have the students read, what you see is all of the internal debate and disagreement within the military. Uh,
massive,
it-
yeah,
yeah, and I think most Americans, I don't know, I don't know how most Americans feel, but anybody with any experience in reading the internal workings of the military and writing would know that there's a lot of independent thinking that goes on, and that disagreement up to a certain point is not just tolerated, but it's sort of encouraged in order to get the best possible result. And this isn't, team of rivals type stuff, but we want to actually achieve this goal. We don't want to pretend to achieve the goal. So,
yeah,
so I want the best possible information because, and it's kind of striking in a world where people want to pretend to do things as opposed to actually do things. The military is one of those places where they actually would like to achieve the goal.
right.
Like we want to actually win this battle, and so there will be strong disagreements within the military that are fully fleshed out and debated. Sorry to,
Yeah, and it's
but
not a new like so, and this is not a new thing, right? So this is a
yeah,
very old, this is from the beginning with Americans, and this is part of our problem these days with the throwing away of history and the condemning of figures in the past because of our supposed moral high ground we're on now that we think we know all of these answers. It's just led us away from understanding anything. So, for example, in this case, in the case of Japanese internment, right? I just read Forrest Pogue's. I'm reading Forrest Pogue's volume 3 of his biography of George C. Marshall, Organizer of Victory, and he covers the Japanese internment in there. It's a really good section. You should take a look at it before you go to the
yeah,
stuff if you haven't. It's excellent. And the guy who was in charge of it on the Western Defense Command was John DeWitt. And I'm reminded, because of the internal debates and because he became kind of the whipping boy about what happened, um, he doesn't have any papers anywhere, which bothers me because he was a key staff officer with George C.
yeah,
Marshall in the Meuse Argonne. He was the logistics officer. He was the G4 for First Army, and he has no papers, and I've never been able to find him. And I'm pretty sure he probably just destroyed all of his stuff so that because he was tired of like all of the abuse he took. And he was a very, very thoughtful person about what was going on with that in turn. And he was all part of the debates, but he became the easy guy to go and critique later on. So like, so we basically, wiped him out of history, except for in this, one case, made him the bad guy and did and pretend like there wasn't a debate and that the War Relocation Authority didn't, in their official report, which came out in 45 or 46, say that the thing said say that the internment Japanese was a mistake. The official government report said this was a mistake. We shouldn't have done it. Yeah, there's reasons why we did it at the beginning, what we thought we understood about the situation. There was a whole lot of local politics that were involved in it, which really drove most of it. Was a lot of local issues that drove most of it. It didn't happen in Hawaii, which is always interesting too. With a much higher Japanese descent, people of Japanese descent population,
yeah.
and
The funny thing is, when I was doing the thing on the uh, Spanish-American War, one of my students asked, what was the population of Japanese people in Hawaii at the time of our acquisition of Hawaii? And it was 40% of the population. And the population of people who had come from the United States, Americans, was less than 2%. It's sort of I didn't know that the numbers were quite that stark, and that was around 1900. The Japanese were a plurality of the population in 1900.
yeah, so
It changes a little bit. That goes up a little bit, and then a lot more Americans start coming after 1900. But boy, that was an interesting moment in time. It's like
yes,
25.
I just think that that whole idea, right? So this goes with the sort of broad things that we use. We use these broad terms when we talk about, back then they were all benighted and racist, and we use these broad terms the way we use them now, which are terribly flawed terms, and so we end up, saying not realizing because we don't read the history because we already know what we need to know about it, right? So we already got this, so we don't read the history and realize that like all the Americans who counted or had any thoughts about it pretty much thought the Japanese were awesome, like
Yeah,
for
and
quite a
that's
long time.
so in
Yeah,
all
like
these documents that I have for my reader, I always say, like, show me look at the date on this, like, and what you realize is that the internal debates begin immediately. They're
oh,
like,
well, I mean, but I'm saying
it's like
long before
within
then.
less than 90 days after Pearl Harbor, there are fierce internal debates that are taking place. Like,
I
and
mean, well, there were Japanese students at Harvard
yeah, yeah.
in the 1800s. There's
Anyway,
like
not to get derailed on the
no, no, but it's just the point,
Japanese
just that
tournament,
point
but
of like the digging into these things sort of gets, yeah. And who else does this besides the United States? And this is always the point I have with it that we have, it's this, there's a presumption that we set out these ideals and we have just like always, we've just fallen so short of them. And all we've ever done is fallen short of them. We've got a long way to go. The genius of the Constitution is that it can be changed and all this. It's just not true. There's no like historical evidence. And so, I'm kind of getting to the point where, because conservatism is such a broken concept, and so like fratricidal. if we could even call them brothers, internal to it, that I'm just like, like, yeah, I don't know, what is my part? I don't know. I'm just patriotic American. Like, I don't know, I'm a founding principles American. Like, that's
Yeah.
it. Like, that's my driving thing on it. Whatever the hell you want to call it, I don't really care.
Yeah.
But
Well, that was
if
one
you,
of the weird things is I kept, Charlie Kirk, who just died, in every headline, it's a conservative activist, and I just kept thinking, really, again, not to speak ill of him, but I never thought of him as being a conservative. Um, some things, but I didn't. That's just not the word I would have used during his lifetime. Um, to describe much of what he was doing. Some of it, but that's not
yeah,
what.
I mean, I just don't, I think that much like strategy, I don't think conservatism means anything.
Yeah, maybe that's the point, right?
Yeah.
Like, but
I mean, it's for those people writing those headlines, it's meant as a pejorative. It's just some way of calling it because, maybe for 30 seconds after he died, they decided to pause on calling him a fascist or a Nazi or Hitler. Um, and so like we'll slide in conservative for that, but we'll get back to calling him a fascist here pretty soon. And that, like I mean, I personally, I think we need to anathemize like the idea of calling anyone fascist, Nazis, or Hitler anymore. Like I think that needs to be removed from the lexicon of the.
well, this is why maybe we need to get, you know, we need to get both the or one of the Lewis brothers back on here to talk about their Myth of Left and Right book, because this we've been on this kick for years, but
Yeah,
I call people fascists if they are actual fascists. You
I'll
know,
call them fascists if they call them. I'll call themselves fascists if they call themselves fascists. That is
yeah.
that is I believe that is actually the only standard. I don't think anyone outside of someone else should be putting people in a box like that. And because I think it's actually become, like I think words are violence in this case. I think it's actually become an indicator that those people need to be stopped by any means necessary. And I
Well,
think I think that is the deliberate intent of it. Unless somebody calls themselves a fascist, that includes
oh
that
yeah,
includes
yeah.
the
You're
world's
saying
leading.
that it's meant to incite violence against that
I
person.
think it is crystal
Yeah,
clear
yeah.
that is what is happening.
And you always bring up our friend Scott Beekman and the American fascists. So I'll let you
But
the Bruscino line on American fascism with Scott Beekman. Just repeat it.
well, I don't know. I mean, what was that guy's name? I keep thinking of the British guy who was a fascist party. William Dudley Pelley was the guy.
Yeah, Pelly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
William Dudley Pelley was the guy. Like, and it was like a clown show in America, and it's a very fringe thing, but they were actually fascists. There was an American Fascist Party, and they were like laughably small, sort of like and pathetic in what they did, but like they're the actual fascists. Like,
yeah.
you know,
And
not
they
not Alf Landon or whatever, like
yeah, not Alf Landon, right? Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Uh, and the book on William Dudley Pedley was written by Scott Beekman, who also writes books on professional wrestling. So
Yeah, and a variety of like
there's something to be said about the American Fascist Party, that the preeminent historian who wrote about it also writes about professional wrestling.
yeah, he does like good Americana, it's like the sort of like there is this part of America that like where people are interested in jackalopes.
Yeah,
And Scott Beekman finds those people fascinating.
yeah,
Like there's like let's write about
Oh,
them.
so, professors, let me interrupt for a second after jackalopes. This is fine that the conversation has gone this way because it's really interesting. And Professor Brusino, thanks for bringing out all these. You've given me lots to think about, so thank you. Um, on the theme of the day, though, which we've gotten away from, are there some Professor Tootle? I'd like you to steer the conversation for 5 or 10 minutes before we open it up to questions. Are there some big broad themes since World War II? But we can keep going back further into our history. But there's some themes that are pertinent today, and I mean from a layman's perspective, just an American citizen, that we should be thinking about America's role in the world. You do this full time, Professor Brusino, in a military way, And I have tremendous respect, not only my own experience when I enlisted and then became an officer, but I've been on academy selection boards. I've know a half a dozen, maybe a dozen generals, 2 and 3 star generals in my career, both civilian and military, and they are smart. I mean, from privates all the way up to generals, the whole spectrum. I don't know if people realize how smart military people are. I mean, it's a really noble, interesting profession, at least in America. So that's your expertise. But how do we take your expertise, which you're teaching these folks, and put it into layman's terms about what should we be thinking about as citizens? And I want you to guide it, Professor Tootle. But if you have any big picture advice for us, Professor Bruscino, it will be dearly appreciated.
Well,
Well,
so
let
this
me.
is,
Oh,
can
go
I,
ahead.
I mean, like, this is, it is exactly what we're talking about. The whole point of this is that, the reason why we're good and the reason why we're great, and those are like different things, but important is because of the orderly liberty. You know, we talk about the rules-based international order. This is this kind of phrase that has come out to describe the post-World War II world, this rules-based international order. Yeah, the rules of that are orderly liberty. Like in the commons, and then occasionally by extension into other places. But in the commons, the stuff that the Americans can kind of police, we have um, like, you know, that we maintain this sort of like orderly liberty. Like, you know, we allow for trade in the markets. We, you know, our opposition. So much like Cuba, actually, like, and this is the same point of the Spanish-American War, and the Monroe Doctrine is like, we don't, you know, we don't care about China being more powerful, or we shouldn't care about China being more powerful. We should care about what China does with that power. If they use that power to create closed systems that do not allow for liberty and human flourishing and allow for people to improve their, you know, to live orderly lives, you know, that impose on people's freedoms instead of proposing that they live better lives, you know, that's the thing we have a problem with. And that's the thing that we are always constantly pursuing. And it's so like nuts because we just, you know, we don't see it about ourselves because we don't teach any of it. We don't teach the civics. We don't talk about this stuff. And so like everybody's, and here's where this relates to the topic of the day, right? I think that what really got us, what really started to kill us, like kill us on this and make it very difficult for us to do this, at least, you know, rhetorically, is the Cold War. You know, this ongoing competition with communism, and particularly because communism, and to give Woodrow Wilson his little bit of due, I think he saw that that was a threat, you know, early on. And a lot of people did saw that it was a threat early on, that this was a massive problem and it was fundamentally a problem, and he needed to like, and the problem of communism and a lot of the socialist ideas that feed it, Marxist ideas that feed it, Leninist ideas, Maoist ideas, doesn't matter, is that they sound good. They're simple and they sound good. We joke about it, sounds like sharing. And we've always like, you know, said that what it's really about is stealing, but that's wrong. It's not actually about stealing. It's not about sharing. It sounds like sharing, but it's really about killing. It's about killing. It's a murderous ideology. Like it is premised on this because it's an anti-human and because it's an anti-human ideology. It does not allow for individual freedom. And this is what we have, but it sounds good, right? And the problem is that we've spent the whole Cold War, like, you know, nuancing ourselves out of an understanding about what we stand for and like sort of saying, yeah, I kind of see their perspective. And we're at this point now where we talk about China and we're teaching people about, you know, you know, in our actions, we're still pretty good because we still have the checks and balances and we still have the fundamental principles that back us. But it comes like China in the world right now. You know, it's like, you know, we're like talking ourselves into the wrong view. Like, I mean, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with this idea of the Chinese talking about their century of humiliation. It's this
Mhm.
communist propaganda. It has some like elements of truth in it. But it sort of, you know, it supposedly goes from, you know, the 1830s to the 1940s, right? Where they were like put upon by all these people, all these outside forces, including the United States. And it, you know, started with like, you know, all these outsiders coming in and taking them over. And then at the end of it, you know, at the end of it, they won their freedom. And, you know, the Chinese Communist Party came to power. And this is like ends the century of humiliation. And that a major player in the humiliating was the United States. It is the most absurd lie. And we talk about it like, well, that's what they believe. That's just their perspective. It's not our job. Like our job is to kill lies, is to oppose lies, to support the truth. And you know, we know this thing is false because it starts with at least sort of minor lie, which is that when in the 1830s when they came in, they were the Qing dynasty, which has another name, which is Manchu, which means they were ruled by foreigners. They were Manchurians who were in charge of their country. Like at the start of it, and at the end of it, it ends with the most whopping lie. And like I can't actually think of something that is a more clear historical that is not up for debate. It's not even remotely up for debate. The Chinese did not, like the Chinese Communist Party especially, did not win their independence. Like the United States and other allies defeated Japan in World War II. Like, and it was an explicit goal of the United States throughout the war to free China, to use China. Like, we are the greatest friend the Chinese have ever had in all of their history, and it is not close. And we're supposed to go, well, they got a perspective. Those outsiders came in. The British did the Opium Wars. Well, that's mildly interesting to me. The United States did not force the Opium Wars. Like there were some businesses who participated in it. There were American businesses, all that stuff. But as a matter of policy for the United States, I mean, we even know it. Our explicit policy towards China is the open door.
Right.
Open door is it's like literally liberty, because literally like have a free trade
And
with
if you
China.
think about American policy in the late 19th and early 20th century, almost all of it is directed at limiting aggressors focused on China. Limiting the Germans, limiting the Dutch, limiting the Japanese, doing everything short of war to limit how much they could hurt China.
Right.
Short of war,
The Stimson Doctrine. I mean, you name it. Like it just doesn't matter. The hey, open door policy. I mean, the initial trade stuff. The Americans, negotiate most favored nation status so that they can whatever the other ones get, the Americans get too, which starts to break the concession system.
So
So the Boxer Rebellion, right? So this is an example of it. The Boxer Rebellion. Everybody like knows about the Boxer, the international effort. We go into China. There's the siege in Peking. At the time. Beijing later. And at the end of it, the international community puts a bunch of indemnities, makes the Chinese pay a bunch of money to all of them. Americans
you
give the money back.
how about a good Funston story? You got
Well, Funston's not in the China fight, but like yeah, but the Americans give the money back. This is the more like I would like they give the money back to China. I think Beijing University is funded with American Boxer indemnity money given back to them. It's founded with that money. Like, does anybody know that? Nope. Why? Because we're the bad guys, and it doesn't fit the convenient narrative of the story. Like, and we still end up like I mean, you think about I almost like fell out of my chair like watching Black Panther, right? When there's a British guy playing an American CIA agent, and one of the Wakanda women calls him a colonialist. I was like, are you talking about the British actor? Like, what colonies does the United States have in Africa? Liberia, kinda. Like, you
yeah.
know, I mean, like in the least way possible. I'm like, what are we talking about?
So
Like,
let me
and we get
John's
all these
original
ideas.
let me John's original question was like, how would we explain this to a regular
Right.
person? Let me run something by you, which is let's call it um, a limited McDougal with a Tootle twist. That in the 21st century, we have lessons we can apply from the 19th and 20th century that American foreign policy and American military policy, as an extension, is best guided when we are in alignment with our ideals and our interests, both. And those are guided by American exceptionalism and unilateralism, um, with the realization that in the post-World War II world, we have nothing to fear from other countries as long as those countries are safe and prosperous and free. And it actually improves it makes America safer when other countries are safe and prosperous and free under a system of ordered liberty. And thus, it is in our national security interests not to have countries that are poor, degraded, unsafe. It actually is in our I don't know if I'm using this word right, but it's in our hard power interest our isn't that how the international relations people talk about it? That other countries be safe and prosperous and free, because it means that we don't have to defend ourselves against New Zealand. You know, we
Yeah,
don't.
so the way I put it, so this is, I think, McDougall doesn't exactly put it this way, but so we're talking about Walter McDougall, Promised Land, Crusader State for everyone out there, and his very, very good book that I highly recommend. I think I've recommended it here before. And what I would say is, I think that we have a category error. I actually do think this is Woodrow Wilson's fault primarily, though there's others who are involved in it. American ideals and interests are the same thing.
Right.
There is no separation between our ideals and our interests because our ideals are orderly liberty, and that is in our interest. It is the only interest that matters. And until we start teaching that, learning that, and realizing that we're oriented that way, I am like mildly interested in people, and I'm pretty diametrically opposed to people who come out and call themselves a realist and say that I'm only like focused on American interests and this stuff. And then they, and I'm like, well, you're gonna have to be clear about that, about what you mean. I'm focused in a world of orderly liberty. And does that mean that does that tell us exactly what to do in all these places? No, it depends on different circumstances. We believe, and we are right, like correctly, that a system of orderly liberty with freedom, free trade, rule of law, all those things will allow for human flourishing, and it will give people the space to live rightly ordered lives. We believe that, and that is an ongoing, never-ending battle of humanity, right? From the beginning. This is us, in our fallen nature that we have to do this. Uh,
But
and
doesn't that mean that our mere existence is always a threat to people who want to organize their societies on the basis of uh, the belief that human beings can't govern themselves and require some sort of uh, dictator to bring about progress and flourishing? So, we don't have to do anything in order to be a threat to Vladimir Putin. Our mere existence is a threat to Vladimir Putin.
I think yes, that's a point. But it's also our mere existence is that way because we are correct and because it's true and
Yep.
it's good and it's beautiful. It is the reason why we're a threat to him is because when he's trying to impose on his people, there is this example out there always.
And to the extent that Lithuania or Poland is expressly, you know, their people are living better lives every day that Lithuania, you know,
Right.
remains a free country, it is a threat to Russia.
Yeah, and they live better lives in their countries because they are part of the broader American system of states. They have an
Oh yeah,
American style constitutionalism. They live like their version of orderly liberty, as good as well as they're doing, and that is right on their border, and which means it's a even closer model to the oppressed people of Russia who want some of that too.
yeah. Especially if you look
And
at the polls, right? I mean, you want to
well,
talk about a success story, right?
I mean, all of the the Baltic states, the Nordic states, all around them is happening. The United States has done remarkable work on it. And like I said, the most important thing for us is to not hate ourselves for it. Like, I mean, I just like this is the thing we have. Like, we cannot hate. We should not hate ourselves for the good we do in the world. I don't know. It is the greatest. It is the greatest threat to our country. Is the way that we is the way that we talk about ourselves and the fact that we do not understand this stuff. Now, to our great credit, I think, and um, I think that the reason why Charlie Kirk drew big audiences the way he did is because they know that what they were being fed was wrong. I'm not saying what he said, everything he said was right, but they knew what they were getting was wrong. And I think there's a lot of people who just know that what they're getting is wrong.
Yeah,
And and they're looking for something else. They want something that sounds right, that matches their experience. It doesn't tell them that they're degraded, awful people because of immutable characteristics that they have. Like this is, you know, only being told that they have to fit, that they must fit in a box. And that box is defined by somebody else.
yeah.
This is what I mean about the calling people fascist issue.
Right.
Like that is the most fundamental violation of someone's freedom that you can actually have. It takes away their freedom of conscience. You are telling them who they fundamentally are with them not having any choice of their own.
And it's let me just pump up an American intellectual who I always never miss a chance to remind people of is James Weldon Johnson, uh, who a lot of his work was focused on the idea of making sure that you preserve your own identity, that you don't take on the false categories that other people try to impose upon you.
Right.
Again, this is a guy who was writing 120 or 100 to 120 years ago about these issues. How did he know so much about it? Well, because of all the people who were telling him what he was supposed to be, you know.
Right.
It does come back to Dirty Dancing, right? Nobody puts baby in a box.
Mhm. In the
We're right
corner.
in a corner. Nobody
In
puts
the
baby
corner.
in a
This
corner.
is the corner. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Nobody puts baby in a corner. Yeah.
All right, professors. We have boy, time travels fast when we're having good conversation. We only have 15 minutes left of the conversation.
All right.
Uh,
This is what it's like when we talk on the phone every day.
well, and it's an honor to be an insider in that. And thanks for sharing that with the broader public when this goes live on YouTube and Spotify. If, with your permission, I'd like to see if one of our longtime listeners, so to speak, Rick Newsom, would either like to ask his question that he typed in, or Rick, you can now ask something else after you've heard further conversation. But if you don't mind, let's go to Q&A for some folks that have joined us. Rick.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I participate in Wreaths Across America every year at the Air Force Academy. And when I engage with those individuals, I do not worry about the character of those who serve. So just, it's very limited exposure I have, nowhere like yours, Tom, but I'm reinforced every time I participate in that. I read a book a number of years ago called The Next 100 Years by George Friedman, who discusses um, why the U.S. is going to have a great 100 years in the future, the next century. And he kind of lays out the strengths we have and why those are going to be so useful going forward. And I don't know if those strengths still exist or if they're more threatened than ever, and if his observations and predictions are still relevant today. For those who may not have read it, he talks a lot about we're the only superpower. Our goal is not to dominate others, is to stop others from becoming superpowers. He talks about our unique place in history of being guarantee of the freedom of the seas. He talks about our unique government, our alliances, the economic position we have, treaties and whatnot. And I worry that a lot of that is being degraded, and we may have a tougher time in the future than what he was suggesting.
And you're looking for reflection on that, Rick?
Yeah, I mean, now at the time I read the book, I was very um, comfortable, inspired with the future for my kids and grandkids. Now I'm not so sure that that future um, is going to unfold the way he's predicting, and we may have a much more turbulent time.
Got it. What do you think, professors?
I'll go first. I think that, one of the things is we got two people, who have been studying history on a daily basis now for decades. I mean, for both of us, we were both the kind of kids who were reading history books for fun when we were 10 years old. And, so for decades, we have been studying American history in a fairly serious way. And I think the message that I would tell people that maybe they would be shocked by is like, don't be afraid of what you will find when you study American history. Because what you'll find is stories of flawed human beings, because all human beings are flawed. But what you will find is extraordinary acts performed by flawed, ordinary people because they were aimed at extraordinary ideals. And it you're not going to become cynical when you study American history. That you shouldn't be afraid of what you're going to find. You should be afraid of what you'll find your second year when you're doing these searches, like, when you're doing keyword searches for bad words or something like that. But once you begin studying it in its proper context, um, you it will be inspiring.
That's insightful. Professor Bruscino.
Yeah, so I think that I kind of hope I know it won't end, right? So history doesn't end, and these things won't go away until the end of time. So, but the I kind of feel like the sort of latest, some of the latest critiques of this, really, it's a Judeo-Christian ancient sort of idea. That some of the latest ones are, well, hopefully in their kind of death rattle, which will then sort of like allow us for some space, and they'll go away for a while, and we can, they'll come back for sure, but we can have some, space for people um, to be less worried and stressed about these things, because of exactly what Stephen talking about, that when it's their turn to step up, and they do it all the time, right? So I was thinking, I don't know if you guys have ever read Tom Holland's book Dominion.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I cannot recommend that book enough. Tom Holland's Dominion actually should be like, we should go back to teaching Western Civ in colleges, and that book should be the textbook that everyone has to read. Um, yeah, it is about how the sort of the Christian worldview, like,
Right, because I know I've read some of his books, but I can't remember what I've read.
he did some one about the Muslim, like history of Muslims. He's done some stuff on
Yeah.
ancient antiquity and stuff. But he just talked about and he's an agnostic, I think, and but wrote
Oh,
about how
does he have a podcast too?
yes, with
Right.
another guy, two Brits that do the
Yep.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
where I've yeah.
But Dominion. But the point of it is that the sort of Christian worldview, like even the critiques of it are based on it, right? So like even the critiques of, and this is like the great thing to get around, is that the critiques of our ideals that we say we have these days are based on our ideals.
Yeah.
Yeah, which gives you an like, and that's because those critiques. Now there are some evil people who use those because they're actually just seeking power. They don't actually, are not actually seeking the ideals. But the reason they have to use that language is because they're trying to gain coalitions of people who believe in those things, who can get duped, but believe in those things.
Wasn't there a joke from like David Foster Wallace or something where he says like somebody asks a fish, "How's the water?" and the fish replies, "What is water?"
Right. And that's kind of the point of
Yeah.
the world that these people live in. Like, and they like really, like all of your fundamental axioms are based on this, on the dignity of each individual human being, for example,
Yeah.
right?
For
Like,
instance.
yeah, which is the kind of primary one, right? Made in the image and likeness of God, very Christian like kind of view, and it applies to every human, right? So it's like
Right.
your fundamental axiom, right? The dignity and worth of every human being, right? Like the horrified reactions we have to that woman being murdered on the train the other day, like the gut react, like this is wrong, almost like there's parts of the world where there people don't think of that, like that's just business as usual or whatever. They're so coarsened by it, but once they encounter the idea, it's intoxicating because it's right, it's true, and it breaks in through all of our sinful natures and makes us like who we are. So what I say about that all of this is a way of saying is that there is some, uh, that is what we're fundamentally about. It's what we're fundamentally about. So as long as we're fundamentally about that, then the next 100 years will take care of themselves. Like,
Gosh, I love
like.
both of your answers. That's just extraordinary. Rick, is that good for you, or do you have a follow up?
That's an extraordinary answer. So
Yeah.
yes, I'm actually, I'm very, very satisfied with it. Thank you.
Yeah, lovely, both of you. Thanks, professors. Bart and Jeff, we only have less than 10 minutes left now. And Bart, you've taken yourself off mic. Go for it.
Okay, I'll go for it. Professor Bruscino, thanks a lot for coming back on. It's really cool listening to you because I know you really teach the American military, and you're a military historian, but you also you know so much about world history that it's just fascinating to kind of listen to you. I'm actually reading a book right now called Conflict by General Petraeus and a guy named Andrews, who I guess is a military historian. I'm saying that I think he's one of the most well-known military historians.
He's Andrew Roberts, is that right?
Yeah, Andrew Roberts. I'm sorry. Yeah, I got his name backwards, kind of. Um, and I'm just kind of trying to educate myself more on military stuff. But one of the things I wanted to ask you guys about, to comment on, is, getting back to kind of the Charlie Kirk thing and all of the crazy things that have been going on in the world, in the last couple of days. Like, I was sorry to hear that you were, your son was caught up in whatever was going on at the Naval Academy yesterday. And it probably actually bothered you much more than your son because, your son is in the Navy and he's being trained to deal with this kind of stuff, but you're not. You're just the parent kind of on the sideline. I know what that feels like. But I've kind of, listening to you guys has made me realize I'm a lawyer, okay? I'm still a lawyer, even now. I'm 66 years old. And I've always wondered, like, why did I really become a lawyer? For some reason, while I was listening to you guys, it hit me. I'm a person who likes to know what a process is that I need to be involved in. And when I'm a process person, all right, I'm not an outcome person. We're living in a world right now where everybody is so concerned with what the outcome is, even if there really is no outcome at that particular moment, that we can't think about what's actually going on. And I find it very frustrating, just personally. Like with the Charlie Kirk situation, it's like, I knew who Charlie Kirk was. I probably disagreed with his politics, but what I have to kind of credit people like Charlie Kirk for doing is being part of the process. He was trying to communicate with people and to get a dialogue going. And yeah, he would say stuff that I guess I would object to, maybe. But did he deserve to die for doing that? Absolutely not. I think it's a loss to our country that someone like that was killed in that way, doing what he was doing. That's just horrible. And it's particularly a shame in this case because he was very young. He kind of had this future ahead of him. And I'm sure he was going to evolve over time. And, now that will never happen. And I don't know if there's another Charlie Kirk out there because he really did connect with young people. And even if I didn't like what he was saying, it doesn't matter because if you can connect with people, that's a good thing in our political system. So I know this is more of like a rambling comment than anything else, but
what's your question though? You started out with the outcome versus
yeah.
What's
I
your
guess
question,
here's
Professor?
my question. How can we begin to start restoring trust in our process institutions? How can we really do that? I know education is a big part of it. Because I know, like, my kids went through, I don't know, 12 years of normal education in this country and probably got next to zero civics. Now they're 30 years old, they've gone through college and they've had none of it. So there's got to be a way to do this. I don't know what it is.
What's your reaction?
I like the outcome versus process thing because I think the first thing we have to teach that we really need to teach people, and it's a very hard lesson for anybody, is that there is no outcome. It's always process, right? Like, there is no sort of like, final thing until the
unless
end.
you're God.
Yeah.
There is no
end. Yeah,
right?
yeah. You're not gonna get to the omega. Yeah, you're like you're not the alpha and you're not getting to the omega, right? So there's that kind of point in there. So, it's like yeah, like I think we need to teach people to more jealously guard their soul, right? Like
Say that again, Professor. Say that again.
more jealously guard their soul. That they should that that they need to stop and that means and that requires work and not projecting their internal like angst out onto the world and blaming the world for it. Right. So, when after he was killed, I had no idea. I had no idea with my kids how much they knew who Charlie Kirk was. I don't police their internet use, all that other stuff. Like, we talk to them about how to approach the world and stuff. But the note I sent to my kids, and it turns out I think all my kids knew who Charlie Kirk was because they've all seen, videos like that Instagram world is kind of like perfect for them and how they look at stuff and TikToks and whatever. And all I said to them was say a prayer for Charlie Kirk and his family and loved ones, and for the poor broken souls who did this or think it is okay. We choose love, not hate. Right. Like, and the we is like like there's appeal to your family, appeal to the Bruscinos, like this is our family, this is what we do. And that reminder of like that's what you have to make these choices every single day. Um, yeah, and that the stop seeking it's because the outcome, the other way to put outcome, the way most people think of outcome is pleasure. They think that if I get the right vehicle, I go on the right vacation, I do this thing, then I will be happy. You won't. You'll have some moments of pleasure. I got a buddy of mine who says, who tells young people, he's a coach, he tells young people, beware of unearned dopamine.
Yeah.
Okay, I really like that phrase, beware of unearned dopamine. Like the earned dopamine, and I think Jonathan Haidt, the psychologist, talks about what fast dopamine, slow dopamine. I think he does that, right? So like we want slow dopamine in life. Like slow dopamine is the ongoing progress of something earned, of like, and the joy of being a parent, um, in the day-to-day stuff, not in the when they just graduated from somewhere. That's a moment of pleasure, but like it's the day-to-day things, like, and it's when you have the conversation in a hard time and your kid responds the right way and you go, "Oh, man, thank you that they're that way," right? And those are the things that we need to do, that you need to like that we need to help people sort of develop that and think about it that way and stop thinking that there's some political end state out there that will provide, an unending stream of dopamine.
Yeah.
Like,
Excellent. Excellent.
yeah. So we're going to do with that, Tootle, if you have anything to.
Professor Tootle, reaction.
Well, it's close to what I was going to say. I could just hold my paper up to prove it, I guess, that part of this is, we talk so much, it's hard not to influence one another when we describe these issues. And I have repeated that phrase about unearned dopamine so many times now because I got it from him. And then for Bart, Sarah Isger from the Dispatch is the one who always says, I'm a process girl in an outcome world. And I thought about making up some T-shirts that just said that and letting people be confused when I wear a T-shirt that says I'm a process girl in an outcome world. And
Need the rhyme.
what's that?
You need the rhyme.
Yeah, yeah.
You change it. You got to
Exactly.
keep it pure.
Right. You can't alter the quote. And then when Tom was talking, I was thinking about Marilyn Robinson makes kind of the same point about where is it that we live? We live within our own consciousness. We should want to create a beautiful space, and and she's very clear about this also, that there is no outcome. I mean, this is the oldest. It's the old. Gosh, I'm nostalgic for this moment. Conservative joke was you can't emmetize the eschaton, right? That was the secret handshake phrase of
National Review.
conservatives 20 years ago. That the source of all this evil in the world is people who are trying to bring about heaven on earth. At the end of the 20th century, was it Pipes or Robert Conquest who wrote that Reflections on a Ravaged Century? And that's his big conclusion after looking at all of the 20th century is look at all of the damage that was done and it was all done by people who are trying to bring about heaven on earth rather than focusing on what our founders understood and what Professor Bruscino just said, which is you don't you don't get to see the omega. That what we're dedicating ourselves to is this peaceful process of dealing with one another that allows us to live lives of peaceful flourishing and then come back and work on stuff next year and get it wrong again and then come back the next year and work on stuff and get some stuff right and some stuff wrong. And democracy will break your heart 49 out of 100 times. But and things don't always get better. But we're going to dust ourselves off. And what do you know? After 250 years, look at what this has actually accomplished. And as to how to achieve it, I just keep coming back to the idea that we don't teach political, diplomatic, or military history anymore.
Mhm.
It's just gone. And what choice do we have in society but to become a bunch of angry reactionaries if we have no perspective on politics, diplomacy, and the military? That we have nobody teaching the teachers these subjects. And the other way, and this gets back to Tom said it in a more elegant way, but what I would have said in a less poetic way was we have to do quality work and we have to reward quality work. That we have to do the slow, laborious work that maybe isn't getting the clicks and the high, and and when we see quality work, that's what we have to reward. Don't, and hopefully that will, you'll avoid a lot of that unearned dopamine if you're, and I think in the long run, you yourself will be happier if you just focus on doing quality work and rewarding quality work and spending your time, as much time as possible, around smart, hardworking, good-hearted people. You know, me talking on the phone to Tom Bruscino doesn't make me a worse person. It makes me a better person because he's a smart person and he's a good-hearted person and he has high character. And when we face challenges, he doesn't. Tom Bruscino knows what love is. You know, because he doesn't give you the advice that reinforces the worst parts of you. Uh, he guides you, well, I should say me because he's not talking to you on the phone, but he guides me towards the better angels of my nature. And you want to spend as much time as possible with somebody like that. That's where you want your brain to be, right? And so when you know people like that, embrace them, make them your brothers, and spend as much time as possible in that world.
Gosh, I love this conclusion of
Yeah.
today's show. That should be the finish, but I got to give Professor Bruscino a last bite at the apple of why he spent an hour and a half with us again today. Is there something you wish us to take away, Professor Bruscino, in either a military or a human way?
Yes, on the human side of this, I'll put this because, again, we like all the military, diplomatic, political history stuff is to provide the space for that orderly liberty to provide the space for people to have well-ordered lives. And I think, and this stuff is hard, right? And you have to, we put it as pick up your cross daily, bear it, make the sacrifices. And so that means like, and it's not like you wanting nice things for other people is not what we're talking about. Um, willing the good of the other as other is the sort of definition of love. Loving radically, like forgiving radically, radical mercy. Practice those things, like, you know, because that's what it means to pick up the cross. You're making a sacrifice. You're sacrificing your anger, your immediate emotions, that unearned dopamine to forgive, to move on, to love, to support. Um, so like along these lines, and I know that it sounds so abstract, but you have a million chances a day to do it. All right, so I'll give you one. Right, I've got a GoFundMe up for a guy I met. Some of you guys saw it, I know. A guy I met at a conference last week. Good guy. And while he was at the conference, his wife got in a car accident and wrecked their minivan. Everybody's okay, except for that they just took on 4 foster kids in addition to their 3 or 4 kids they have of their own. Because now they don't have a minivan, they're not paying for it. I consider it providential. I met him there, and they told us the story. Good man, faithful man, obviously like a good person willing to do these things. His wife and And so, and I can consider it providential that I invited my one of my other best friends to come down from Cleveland and come to this conference. And he was there, and he said, "You should start a GoFundMe." And so, and he got his contact information. So we started a GoFundMe for this guy. So if we could, I don't know if you could put it in the show notes. I hear him say that on podcasts I listen to, whatever those are. If you could put a link to the GoFundMe for these folks, and if anybody could help those guys out, I would really appreciate it. Again, like, you know, it seems like a loss, but man, you gain everything from it. You know, you gain everything from giving radically, from loving radically.
And by the
Well,
way, would anybody expect this from a military historian? You know, you
I
hear
was
stereotypes
saying that. Yeah.
about football player. Oh, he's a football player, and oh, he's from Cleveland or Colorado. You know, and he's spent his whole professional career studying military history, and then look at the message that he left us with.
Yeah, completely. Another wonderful end of the show. Professor Tootle, I forgive me. I've got to know what those three bobbleheads are there. I know it's not as
Oh,
meaningful.
yeah. These are, the bobbleheads I had of people in their military uniforms. So I happen to have Washington and his military uniform, and of course I've got Eisenhower and his military uniform. And then this one, I don't think Tom's seen this one, but I have actually TR in his Rough Riders outfit. You know.
Oh my gosh, there's oh. All right, Professor Bruscino, who are you holding up now?
Well, these were both like randomly sent to me by Tootle. He just randomly sends me bobbleheads occasionally. So I got John Quincy Adams and Ulysses S. Grant.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe someday in the future we could do a show and we could talk about why he's the greatest general in all of human history, and it's not close. We'll do
Yeah.
that. Maybe we'll do that someday. We do a
Yeah,
Grant
well,
one.
I didn't know we would end with bobbleheads, so that cracks me up. I think this was a fascinating conversation today, gentlemen. This was not the conversation I was planning on having. It was better. So thank you both. Professor Bruscino, I think this was your second or third time on our show over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah,
Uh,
third. Yeah.
you honor us. I know you have a friendship with Professor Tootle, and that's why you say yes. But again, we're planting seeds or breadcrumbs, and hopefully people will find them, and maybe it will make an impact on their life when they do find us. I'm sure of it. So, Professor Bruscino and Tootle, thank you for your time. America needs you. Have a great day, you all.
Well, thank you.
I'm good.